I thought I'd say a few words about the New York City Ground Zero Mosque controversy. Now, it's obvious that they have the legal right to build the mosque, and that's not the question. I think, as long as the transaction to buy the land, that property was lawful, there's nothing the government can or should do to physically stop that project from being implemented. In fact, there's a gubernatorial candidate, a Republican candidate in the state of New York. I think his name is Carl Palladino. He's running ads as we speak, saying that if elected governor, he will use the power of eminent domain to stop the construction of the mosque. I think is detestable. I consider eminent domain to be evil, so I can't support that. So no, I don't think the government should stop the construction of the mosque. Now, the question is obviously not whether they have the right to do it, but whether they should do it, whether it's appropriate for them to do it. Now, things like should or appropriate are interesting because it all depends on what is the perspective that you're looking at this from. If you're looking at it from their perspective, of course they should build a mosque. I think now, if we're going to speculate about their motives here, there's a stated purpose, a stated objective, and the real objective. I don't think they're one and the same thing. I don't believe that, as they state, they are constructing this mosque to build dialogue and promote understanding and tolerance. I don't think that's the case. I think they're building it as a monument to their victory over the Western way of life on 9/11. I think they're building it to offend us in order to proclaim the superiority of Islam. And this new mosque would be a symbol of that victory that they want to promote. Now, if you look at it from a point of view of another constituency, for example, the families of the 9/11 victims, now that would be tremendously offensive to them. I can understand that. Now, to have people who sympathize with the kind of group that actually killed your loved one on 9/11, to have that similar group, because the Cordoba Initiative is similar, they're not denouncing violent Islam. They're not denouncing Muslim fanatics that kill people in order to promote their outrageous barbaric religion. I'm not saying they are Al-Qaeda, but they're definitely not enemies of Al-Qaeda. So to have that similar group build a mosque steps away from where fanatics murdered your loved one is tremendously offensive, and those people are going to suffer if that mosque gets built. But let's look at it from a broader perspective here. I think the real battle is not fought on, it does not hinge upon whether or not this particular mosque gets constructed. As we speak, there are dozens of mosques in New York City, and there are probably hundreds, if not thousands, of mosques across the country. And as we speak, they are recruiting weak, feeble-minded Americans and recent immigrants into the religion of Islam, into the violent factions of the religion of Islam. I don't know that there's a viable, non-violent, mainstream, quote-unquote, faction of Islam. I don't know that. I don't see mass protests by regular Muslims against Muslim terrorism. They don't all come out and sympathize with every single terrorism act, but they don't, sure as hell are not condemning the acts of terrorism around the world perpetrated by Muslims. So again, I'm not saying every Muslim is a terrorist. I'm just a little perplexed and confused by the lack of overwhelming renunciation by mainstream Muslims, again, if such a thing even exists, by moderate Muslims, of those acts of terrorism perpetrated by the allegedly small radical faction of this religion. And the trouble with Islam, as I said in one of my earlier videos, is that it's not just a code of personal ethics and a personal guide to finding God and to conducting your own internal spiritual life. Islam, as a teaching, contains a whole political doctrine, which means an understanding, not just an understanding, but the actual teaching on how society should be organized, how the state should be organized, and how certain types of behaviors should be forced on people and other types of behaviors, while non-violent and not hurting anybody, should be outlawed and punished, including by death. And, honor killings are real. Stonings of women on the suspicion of infidelity are real. Noses and ears being cut off the faces of little girls whose only crime was to not want to live under this barbaric ideology. All those things are real. So that's the trouble with Islam. It actually contains a doctrine of the state and politics, as it should be conducted under Sharia law. So if we'll look at it from that perspective, that's where the battle is. The battle is right here. We need to recruit people into the ideology of freedom. We need to recruit people into the ideology of natural law and natural rights and individual dignity and the sanctity of individual life and liberty, as a direct antithesis of the barbaric totalitarian ideology of Islam. That's where the real struggle is going to be, and it is right there even as we speak. Now, whether they construct this particular mosque or not is not going to change the fact, again, that in thousands of mosques across the country, people are being radicalized or allow themselves to be radicalized into believing that jihad is the way and the West is the problem. We should not be afraid of these people building another mosque. Of course we're going to be insulted, but that's fine. Unlike a lot of people on the left in this country, I don't believe that I have an inalienable right to not be ever offended by anything anybody else ever does or says. I think it's fine when somebody offends me. That's fine. As long as they don't touch me physically and don't do violence, that's fine. Obviously, we should be watching them. Obviously, if they begin to plot criminal things, violent things, assassinations and acts of terror, those people should be seized, arrested, and prosecuted. But while they're doing that, while they're just operating their mosque, we should mock them, we should ridicule them, and we should publicize the truth about Islam. There are two things that we need to do, I think, in order to combat the real threat. And the real threat is the spread of ideology of Islam. I believe that the real struggle, the real battle, is in the realm of ideas and philosophy, and that's where we need to fight, not in the realm of buildings and mosques. Again, they outlawed minarets in Switzerland, but they haven't outlawed, as they shouldn't outlaw a way of thinking, and they can't outlaw the way of thinking. Thoughts are not crimes, words are not crimes, but have they actually stopped or diminished the threat of Islam because certain architectural forms can't be built now in the country of Switzerland? I don't think so. The actual threat comes from the weakness here.